They told me I was dead to them on my 30th birthday, right between the appetizers and the main course. My mother didn't even put down her wine glass when she said it. My father nodded along like she'd just commented on the weather. My sister Vanessa sat across from me, perfectly still, her fork hovering over her seared scallops as if none of this was actually happening. But it was happening. In the middle of Maple and Ash, one of Chicago's most elegant steakhouses, surrounded by couples celebrating anniversaries and businessmen closing deals, my family calmly informed me that I no longer existed to them. No screaming, no scene, just cold precision wrapped in expensive fabric and polite smiles for the waiter who kept refilling our water glasses. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What they didn't know was that 3 weeks later, Vanessa would collapse in a hotel room in Paris, and I would be the only person who could save her. What they really didn't know was that by the time I boarded that flight, I had already uncovered every lie they'd built their perfect lives on. The forged documents, the stolen inheritance, the false medical records they'd created to paint me as unstable. By the time my mother called me sobbing and begging for help, I had already decided exactly how this story would end. And it wouldn't be with me begging for a seat at their table. My name is Natalie Wagner, and I'm an urban planner for the city of Chicago. I spend my days redesigning neighborhoods, figuring out how to make spaces more livable, more equitable, more human. There's a certain irony in that, considering I spent the first 30 years of my life trying to figure out how to fit into a family that had already decided there was no space for me. I should have seen it coming. The signs were always there, scattered like breadcrumbs through every family holiday, every graduation, every milestone where I stood just slightly outside the frame. But when you grow up in that kind of cold, you learn to tell yourself it's normal. You convince yourself that love is supposed to feel like proving yourself over and over, like auditioning for a role you'll never quite land. The dinner was Vanessa's idea, or at least that's what my mother told me when she called 2 weeks before my birthday. "We'd love to celebrate with you, sweetheart," Diane said in that crystalline voice she used when she wanted something to sound genuine. Vanessa suggested Maple and Ash. "She knows how much you love their ribeye." I should have questioned why my sister, who hadn't returned my calls in 6 months, suddenly wanted to organize a birthday dinner. I should have wondered why my parents, who had quietly uninvited me from Thanksgiving and Christmas the year before, were suddenly eager to commemorate me turning 30. But I was tired. Tired of being the one who noticed the patterns. Tired of being the one who cared. So I said yes. I bought a new dress, navy blue with a subtle shimmer that caught the light when I moved. I made a reservation at a salon and had my hair blown out in loose waves. I even practiced smiling in the mirror, the kind of smile that says I'm fine, everything's fine, I'm not desperately hoping tonight will be different. When I walked into Maple and Ash at 7:15 on a Friday evening in late September, the hostess greeted me warmly and led me to a corner table where my family was already seated. My mother wore ivory, as always. My father had on his navy blazer with the gold buttons, the one he wore to important dinners. Vanessa looked radiant in emerald green, her hair swept into an elegant chignon, diamond studs glinting in her ears. They stood when I arrived. My mother kissed the air beside my cheek. My father shook my hand, which should have been my first clue that something was deeply wrong, because my father had never shaken my hand in my life. Vanessa hugged me, brief and stiff, and whispered happy birthday before pulling away quickly. We sat. The waiter appeared with menus and a wine list. My father ordered a bottle of Chateau Margaux without asking anyone's preference. My mother complimented my dress in a way that felt like an assessment rather than praise. Vanessa studied her menu intently, as if memorizing it for an exam. The conversation was light at first, almost aggressively pleasant. My mother talked about the new art gallery opening in Scottsdale where she and my father had retired 2 years ago. My father mentioned his golf handicap improving. Vanessa shared a carefully edited version of her recent promotion to senior vice president at the marketing firm where she'd worked since graduating from Northwestern. I told them about a housing project I was working on in Pilsen, a neighborhood revitalization initiative that would create affordable units for families who'd been priced out. My mother smiled politely. My father checked his phone. Vanessa nodded but didn't ask any follow-up questions. The appetizers arrived. Oysters for my father, burrata for my mother, tuna tartare for Vanessa, and I'd ordered the beef carpaccio. We ate in the kind of synchronized silence that families develop over decades, the rhythm of forks on plates, the occasional murmur of appreciation, the waiter gliding by to ensure everything was perfect. It was so perfectly normal that I almost relaxed. Almost convinced myself that maybe this time would be different. Maybe they really did want to celebrate me. Maybe 30 was the year they'd finally see me as an adult worthy of their respect. Then my mother set down her wine glass. She dabbed her lips with her napkin, that deliberate gesture she always made before saying something she'd rehearsed. "Natalie," she began, and I felt my spine straighten instinctively. "Your father and I have been talking, and we think it's time we had an honest conversation about where things stand." I looked at my father, who was staring at his oyster shells like they contained ancient wisdom. I looked at Vanessa, whose face had gone carefully blank. I looked back at my mother, who was watching me with something that resembled pity, but colder. "We've tried," she continued, her voice steady and quiet, "to include you in this family despite your choices. Despite your issues. Despite the strain you've put on all of us over the years." My mouth went dry. "What issues?" I managed to say. "What strain?" My mother sighed as if I'd just proven her point. "This is exactly what we're talking about. This defensiveness. This inability to take responsibility." I felt something sharp lodge itself in my throat. I looked around the table again, desperate for someone to contradict her, to laugh and say this was some kind of terrible joke. But my father remained silent, and Vanessa was staring at her lap. "We think it's best," my mother said, "if we create some distance. Permanent distance." My father finally spoke, his voice gruff and uncomfortable. "What your mother is saying, Natalie, is that we've decided to move forward as a family without you. You're not a good influence on Vanessa, and frankly, we're exhausted." The words hit me like cold water. Without me. Not a good influence. Exhausted. I tried to form a response, but my thoughts were scattering like startled birds. "What are you talking about?" I said, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. "I haven't done anything. I've been trying to be part of this family my entire life." My mother's expression didn't change. "That's the problem, Natalie. You're always trying. Always forcing yourself into spaces where you don't fit. Always making everything about you and your feelings. Vanessa has worked incredibly hard to build her career and her reputation, and we need to protect that. We need to protect our peace." I felt my face flush hot, then cold. "This is my birthday dinner," I said, and I hated how my voice cracked. "You invited me here on my birthday to tell me I'm dead to you." My father shifted uncomfortably. "Don't be dramatic, Natalie. We're simply setting boundaries." Vanessa finally looked up, and for a split second, I saw something flicker across her face. Guilt, maybe. Or fear. But then it was gone, replaced by that same careful blankness. "I'm sorry, Nat," she said quietly. "But I think this is for the best." The waiter appeared then, oblivious to the bomb that had just detonated at our table. "How is everything tasting?" he asked brightly. My mother smiled at him, radiant and gracious. "Absolutely wonderful," she said. "We're having a lovely evening." He beamed and walked away. I sat there, fork still in my hand, carpaccio half eaten, trying to understand what universe I'd just slipped into. "So that's it," I said, looking at each of them in turn. 30 years and you're just done." My mother took another sip of wine. "We're not doing this here, Natalie. We've made our decision. If you need to contact us for any legal or administrative matters, you can reach out to our attorney. Otherwise, we'd appreciate it if you respected our wishes." I stood up then, not because I'd decided to leave, but because my body needed to move or I would shatter right there in my chair. "Legal matters," I repeated. "You're giving me your lawyer's information at my birthday dinner." My father pulled a business card from his wallet and slid it across the table. "Dr. Lucas Brennan," it read. Estate attorney. I stared at it for a long moment, then looked back at my father. You planned this, I said. You brought a lawyer's card to my birthday dinner. He didn't respond. I looked at Vanessa, who was now staring intently at her wine glass. Van, I said, my voice breaking. Please. She shook her head slightly, barely perceptible. I can't, Nat. I just can't. I picked up the card, slipped it into my purse, and walked out of that restaurant with my head high and my heart in pieces. I didn't cry in the Uber home. I didn't cry when I walked into my loft in Wicker Park, the space I'd carefully designed to feel warm and safe, with its exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. I didn't cry when I took off that navy blue dress and hung it carefully in my closet, or when I washed off my makeup and braided my hair for bed. I sat on the edge of my mattress in the dark, still holding that business card, and I felt something shift inside me. Not breaking, but hardening. Calcifying. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'd spent 30 years trying to earn their love, trying to be good enough, trying to understand what I'd done wrong. And in one dinner, they'd made it clear that there was no right answer. I was the problem simply by existing. The next morning was Saturday. I woke up to 17 text messages, none of them from my family. My best friend Iris had sent a string of increasingly concerned messages after I'd told her I couldn't meet up because of the dinner. You okay? How'd it go? Nat, you're worrying me. Call me when you can. I didn't call. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen counter, that business card still on the table where I'd left it the night before. Dr. Lucas Brennan. Estate attorney. Why would they need me to contact an estate attorney? My grandmother Catherine had passed away 3 years ago, and as far as I knew, everything had been settled. The lake house in Lake Geneva had gone to my parents. The stocks and bonds had been divided. I'd received a small check for $5,000 and a box of her old costume jewelry that my mother had deemed too sentimental to sell but not valuable enough to keep. But something nagged at me. I opened my laptop and started searching. Dr. Lucas Brennan had a polished website with photos of his office in downtown Chicago, testimonials from grateful clients, a list of services that included estate planning, trust administration, and probate litigation. I clicked on his bio. He'd been practicing for 25 years, specializing in high net worth families and complex inheritance disputes. I sat back, staring at the screen. Why would my parents need someone who specialized in inheritance disputes? Unless there was a dispute. Unless there was something to dispute. I spent the rest of that weekend in a strange fog, going through the motions of normal life while my mind spun in circles. I went to the farmer's market and bought vegetables I didn't cook. I cleaned my apartment until every surface gleamed. I organized my closet by color and season. I did everything except think about that dinner, except replay my mother's words, except acknowledge the hole that had opened up in my chest. On Monday, I went to work. My office was in a converted warehouse in the West Loop, all open floor plans and collaborative spaces that I'd helped design. My co-workers were the kind of people who brought homemade cookies to meetings and remembered your coffee order. Iris worked 2 desks over, and the moment she saw my face, she rolled her chair over. Oh no, she said. It was bad. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She waited, patient as always. After a long moment, I told her. Not the whole story, just the highlights. Birthday dinner. They said I was dead to them. They gave me their lawyer's card. Iris's face cycled through shock, anger, and something that looked like grief on my behalf. Nat, she said quietly. What the actual hell? I shrugged, trying to appear casual and failing spectacularly. Apparently I'm a bad influence on Vanessa and they're tired of me forcing myself into the family. Iris looked like she wanted to say something sharp and protective, but instead she just reached over and squeezed my hand. What are you going to do? I didn't know. For 3 days, I functioned on autopilot. I attended meetings about zoning regulations and affordable housing models. I reviewed architectural plans and made notes about accessibility compliance. I smiled when appropriate and nodded at the right moments. But underneath, I was barely holding myself together. On Thursday evening, I was home making dinner, chopping vegetables with more force than necessary, when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Hello," I said cautiously. "Is this Natalie Wagner?" a woman's voice asked, professional and slightly harried. "Yes. This is Claire Dubois calling from Hôpital Américain de Paris. We have your sister Vanessa Wagner here. She was brought in by emergency services approximately 2 hours ago." My knife clattered to the cutting board. "What happened? Is she okay?" "Ms. Wagner is stable, but she's had a serious medical episode. We found your contact information listed as her emergency contact in her phone. We need to discuss her treatment options and potentially arrange for medical transport back to the United States. Your parents, we tried to reach them first as listed, but their phones are going to voicemail." I stood there in my kitchen, vegetables half chopped, phone pressed to my ear, trying to process what I was hearing. My sister, who had sat silently while our parents disowned me 6 days ago, had listed me as her emergency contact. My parents, who had declared me dead to them, couldn't be reached in a crisis. And I was standing in Chicago being asked to make decisions about someone who'd chosen them over me without hesitation. "What kind of medical episode?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. The nurse, Claire, hesitated. "I really should discuss this with you in person or at least with more privacy. But I can tell you it was cardiac related. She's conscious now and asking for you." "She's asking for me?" "Yes. She's been quite insistent actually." Those were the words that did it. Not the emergency, not the hospital, not even the cardiac episode. But the image of Vanessa, scared and alone in a Paris hospital, asking for me. Despite everything, despite the birthday dinner and the silent complicity and the years of being chosen last, I couldn't ignore that. "I'll be on the next flight," I said. "Can you give me the hospital information and her room number?" Claire rattled off details that I scribbled on the back of an envelope. I thanked her and hung up. Then I stood in my kitchen for a full minute, not moving, trying to decide if I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. I called the airline. There was a direct flight to Paris leaving O'Hare at 10:15 that night. I booked it. Then I called Iris. "I need you to cover my meetings tomorrow," I said without preamble. "I'm going to Paris." There was a pause. "For work?" "For Vanessa. She's in the hospital." There was a longer pause, and I could practically hear Iris's internal debate about whether to talk me out of this. "Nat," she said carefully, "after what they did to you, you don't owe them anything." "I know," I said. "But I can't just leave her there. She's scared and she asked for me. And maybe, I thought but didn't say out loud, this is my chance to finally understand what happened. To get answers. To figure out why they chose to cut me out so completely." I packed quickly, throwing clothes into a carry-on without much thought. Jeans, sweaters, comfortable shoes. My passport was still valid from a work trip to Toronto 6 months ago. I grabbed my laptop and charger, my phone and portable battery, my wallet with my credit cards that I hoped would work internationally. I stood in my apartment one more time, looking around at the life I'd built for myself, the space that was entirely mine, and I felt that same hardness from the birthday dinner settle over me again. I wasn't going to Paris to reconcile with my family. I wasn't going to beg for their love or try to prove I was worthy. I was going because Vanessa was scared and asking for me, and because somewhere underneath all the hurt, I still had enough heart left to answer. The flight was long and sleepless. I sat in my window seat watching the darkness outside, occasionally catching glimpses of city lights far below when we passed over populated areas. I kept replaying the birthday dinner in my head, picking apart every word, every gesture, trying to find the moment where I could have changed the outcome. But the truth was, there was no such moment. This hadn't been a spontaneous decision made in anger. They'd planned it. They'd brought a lawyer's card. They'd coordinated their message. They'd decided, carefully and deliberately, that I was disposable. When we landed at Charles de Gaulle, it was early morning Paris time, and my body felt like it belonged to someone else. I navigated customs and immigration on autopilot, collected my bag, and found a taxi. The driver spoke minimal English, but I showed him the hospital address on my phone and he nodded. We drove through Paris in the grey dawn light, past the elegant buildings and narrow streets I'd always dreamed of seeing under different circumstances. The Hôpital Américain de Paris was located in Neuilly-sur-Seine, a wealthy suburb just outside the city center. It was a private hospital that catered to international patients, which made sense for Vanessa, who would have spared no expense for her comfort even in a medical crisis. I walked into the lobby with my carry-on still in tow, rumpled from the flight and running on nothing but adrenaline and stale airplane coffee. The receptionist spoke perfect English and directed me to the cardiac care unit on the 3rd floor. I took the elevator up, my heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with exertion. When the doors opened, I followed the signs down a quiet hallway until I found room 312. I stood outside for a moment, hand on the door handle, trying to prepare myself for whatever I was about to face. Then I pushed it open. Vanessa was sitting up in bed, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, hospital gown wrinkled, fur line running into her left arm. She looked small and pale and nothing like the confident woman in emerald green who'd sat across from me 6 days ago. When she saw me, her face crumpled. "Nat," she whispered. "You came." I set down my bag and walked to her bedside. "Of course I came," I said. "You asked for me." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't know if you would. After everything. After what we did." I pulled a chair up next to her bed and sat down. "Van," I said quietly, "what happened? What are you even doing in Paris?" She wiped her face with the back of her hand like a child. "I was here for work," she said. "A conference for the marketing firm. I was supposed to give a presentation yesterday morning, but I woke up feeling awful. Chest pain, shortness of breath. I thought it was just anxiety because the presentation was such a big deal. But it kept getting worse. My hotel concierge called an ambulance. The doctor said I had a cardiac event. They're calling it stress-induced cardiomyopathy, but they're still running tests to make sure there's nothing else wrong." I stared at her. "You had a heart attack. At 32. "Not exactly a heart attack," she said. "It's called broken heart syndrome. It mimics a heart attack, but it's caused by extreme stress or emotional trauma." The doctor asked me if something significant had happened recently. Something that would cause that kind of stress. I watched her face carefully. "And what did you tell them?" She looked away. "I told them about the dinner. About what we did to you. I told them I haven't been able to sleep since then. That I've been having panic attacks. That I keep seeing your face when you walked out of that restaurant." The doctor said my body was manifesting the guilt I wouldn't let myself feel. I sat back in my chair, processing this. "So you had a stress-induced cardiac episode because you felt guilty about disowning me at my birthday dinner." She nodded miserably. "I know how it sounds. I know I don't deserve your sympathy. But Nat, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you years ago." I leaned forward. "What?" She took a shaky breath. "Mom and Dad, they made me choose. They've been making me choose for years. Every time I got close to you, every time I stood up for you, they would threaten to cut me off. To take away my trust fund, my inheritance, my place in the family. They said I could have their love and support or I could have you, but not both." My chest tightened. "When did this start?" She closed her eyes. "Do you remember when I was 16 and you were 14? We were so close that summer. We told each other everything." I felt a memory surface, hazy and sun-drenched. The summer at the lake house. We'd spent every day swimming and reading on the dock and staying up late talking about our dreams. "Yes," I said. "I remember." Vanessa's voice was barely audible. That was the summer Dad sat me down and told me you were becoming a problem. That you were too needy, too emotional, too much. He said I needed to create distance or you would drag me down with you. He said I had potential but only if I stopped letting you hold me back. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. You were 16. He told you that when you were 16. She nodded, tears flowing freely now. And I believed him, Nat. Or at least, I was too scared not to. So I pulled away. I stopped confiding in you. I started spending more time with Mom and Dad and less time with you. And every time you tried to reach out, every time you asked what was wrong, I pushed you further away because that's what they wanted. And the more I did it, the more they rewarded me. Better birthday presents. More attention. Approval. By the time we were adults, it had become automatic. Choose them, not you. Protect my position, not our relationship. I sat there absorbing this, trying to reconcile the sister I'd lost gradually over the years with this confession. Why are you telling me this now? She looked at me directly for the first time. Because when I woke up in this hospital room, the first person I wanted was you. Not Mom. Not Dad. You. And when they couldn't reach Mom and Dad, and the nurse called you instead, and you actually answered, I realized something. You're the only person in my life who would have gotten on a plane in the middle of the night to be here for me. After everything we've done to you, after we literally told you that you were dead to us, you still came. And I don't deserve that. But I need you to know the truth. What truth? About everything. About Grandma Catherine's will. About the lake house. About why they really wanted you gone. I felt my pulse quicken. What about Grandma Catherine's will? Vanessa glanced at the door as if checking to make sure we were alone. Nat, she didn't leave everything to Mom and Dad. She left the lake house to you. The words hung in the air between us like smoke. She left the lake house to you. I stared at Vanessa, trying to process what she'd just said. My grandmother's lake house in Lake Geneva, the place where I'd spent every summer of my childhood, the white clapboard house with the wraparound porch and the boat dock that stretched out into the water like an outstretched arm. The house where my grandmother had taught me to bake bread and identify birds and swim in water so cold it made your lungs seize. That house was supposed to be mine. What do you mean she left it to me? I said slowly. Mom and Dad have been using it. They go there every summer. They had the dock rebuilt last year. Vanessa shifted in her hospital bed, wincing slightly. They forged the documents, Nat. After Grandma died, they found her real will with her attorney. It specifically stated that the lake house and everything in it went to you. The rest of the estate, the investments and savings, those were to be split between them and me. But the house was yours. She wanted you to have it because you loved it the way she did. You were the only one who ever sat on that porch with her counting stars. I felt my hands start to shake. I pressed them flat against my thighs. If the will said the house was mine, then how do they have it? Vanessa looked down at her hands, picking at the hospital bracelet on her wrist. Dad found an estate attorney, Dr. Brennan, the one whose card they gave you. He helped them create a revised version of the will. They claimed Grandma had changed her mind in her final months, that she'd been confused and they'd helped her update everything. They had documents drawn up that looked official. They even had someone forge Grandma's signature. The original attorney who handled her estate retired right after she died, and his replacement didn't question the paperwork. Everything went through probate using the fake will. I stood up abruptly, needing to move. The hospital room suddenly felt suffocating. I walked to the window and stared out at the Paris skyline, trying to organize my thoughts. So for 3 years, they've been using a house that legally belongs to me. They've been maintaining it, renovating it, probably claiming it on their taxes. And they did all of this knowing it was fraud. Vanessa's voice was small behind me. Yes. And they were terrified you'd find out. That's why they've been pushing you away more and more over the past few years. Every time you mentioned wanting to visit the lake house, every time you talked about Grandma, they got nervous. They were afraid you'd start digging into the estate records. That you'd ask questions. I turned back to face her. Is that why they disowned me at my birthday dinner? Were they trying to make sure I'd never find out? She nodded. Partly. But also because I told them I couldn't keep lying to you anymore. I told them 2 weeks before your birthday that I wanted to tell you the truth about the lake house. That it wasn't fair and I couldn't live with the guilt anymore. Dad went ballistic. He said if I told you anything, he'd cut me off completely. He'd make sure I lost my job, my inheritance, everything. And Mom, she said that if I chose you over them, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. So they decided to take care of the problem permanently. If they disowned you first, publicly and definitively, then even if you found out about the will later, you'd have no family support to fight them. You'd be alone. I sank back into the chair, my legs suddenly unable to hold me. They planned the whole thing. The birthday dinner, the lawyer's card, all of it. It wasn't spontaneous cruelty. It was strategic elimination. Vanessa was crying again, her shoulders shaking. I'm so sorry, Nat. I should have told you years ago. I should have stood up to them. I should have been a real sister to you. But I was so scared of losing everything. Of being the one they cut off. And I told myself that if I just played along, eventually they'd ease up. Eventually things would get better. But they never did. They just kept asking me to choose, and I kept choosing wrong. I watched her cry and felt a strange detachment. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her it was okay, that I understood. But another part of me, the part that had been systematically erased from family photos and events and now from an inheritance, felt nothing but cold clarity. Van, I said quietly, do you have any proof? Any documentation about the real will or the forgery? She wiped her face and nodded. I made copies. About a year ago, I was at Mom and Dad's house in Scottsdale and I found a folder in Dad's office safe. I wasn't supposed to be in there, but he'd given me the code once in case of emergencies and I remembered it. The folder had everything. The original will with Grandma's real signature. Correspondence between Dad and Dr. Brennan about creating the revision. Even a receipt from someone who specializes in document verification, dated 2 weeks before the fake will was submitted to probate. Why did you keep copies? Why didn't you turn them in? She looked away, shame written across her face. Because I was still hoping I wouldn't have to. I thought maybe Dad would come to his senses. Maybe Mom would feel guilty. Maybe they'd just give you the house and we could pretend none of this happened. But instead they just kept escalating. Kept pushing you further away. And when they decided to do the birthday dinner, I knew there was no going back. They'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross for them. So I kept the copies as insurance. In case everything fell apart. I guess I knew on some level that it would. Where are the copies now? In my apartment in Chicago. I have a safety deposit box at my bank. Everything's in there. Vanessa met my eyes. Nat, if you want to fight this, I'll help you. I'll testify. I'll give you the documents. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or ulterior motive, but all I saw was exhaustion and genuine remorse. Why now? I asked. Why are you suddenly willing to stand up to them? She gestured weakly at the hospital room around us. Because apparently my body decided to shut down rather than keep living with the lie. Because when I thought I might actually die here, the only thing I regretted was how I treated you. Not losing Mom and Dad's approval. Not losing my inheritance. Just you. Just my sister. I sat with that for a long moment. The hospital was quiet except for the beep of Vanessa's heart monitor and the distant sound of footsteps in the hallway. Finally, I spoke. I need to think about this. I need to figure out what I want to do. But Van, you need to understand something. Even if I decide to fight for the house, even if I use your evidence and you testify and we somehow win, that doesn't mean we go back to how things were. That doesn't mean I forget the last 15 years. She nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. I know. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to have what's rightfully yours. And I want to stop being the person who chose wrong. A nurse came in then, checking Vanessa's vitals and adjusting her for. She asked if I was family and I said yes before I could stop myself. The nurse smiled and said visiting hours were flexible for immediate family, but that Vanessa needed rest. I promised I'd step out soon. When the nurse left, Vanessa looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You still called yourself family, she said softly. After everything. I shrugged, suddenly uncomfortable. Habit, I guess. Or maybe just because you're in a hospital bed in a foreign country and you needed someone to claim you. She smiled sadly. You've always been the better person, Nat. Even when I didn't deserve it. I stayed in Paris for 2 more days. I found a small hotel near the hospital, an old building with creaky floors and a view of a narrow side street. I spent the days sitting with Vanessa while doctors ran tests and confirmed that her heart was structurally sound, that the episode had been purely stress-related, and that with rest and stress management she should make a full recovery. I helped her coordinate with her company to extend her leave and reschedule her presentation. I contacted the U.S. Embassy to make sure her insurance paperwork was in order. I did all the practical things an older sister would do, even though she was technically older than me, even though she'd spent years doing the opposite for me. We didn't talk much about the lake house or the forgery during those 2 days. Instead, we talked about smaller things. She told me about her job, the pressure she felt to constantly perform, to be perfect, to justify her place at the top of her company. I told her about my work in urban planning, about the housing project in Pilsen that I was passionate about how I'd found purpose in creating spaces where people felt they belonged. She asked about my life in Chicago, my apartment, my friends. I told her about Iris, about the farmer's market I went to every weekend, about the little routines that made me feel grounded. It was strange and tentative and nothing like the easy closeness we'd had as kids, but it was something. A beginning, maybe. Or an ending. I wasn't sure yet. On my last morning in Paris, Vanessa was being discharged. The hospital had arranged for medical transport to fly her back to Chicago with a nurse escort, and she'd asked if I wanted to fly back on the same plane. I told her I needed a few more days to think. She understood. Before I left her room, she grabbed my hand. The safety deposit box key, she said. It's in my apartment. Top drawer of my dresser, in a jewelry box shaped like a book. The box code is your birthday. She squeezed my hand. Everything you need is in there. Everything to prove what they did. I flew back to Chicago 3 days later. I'd spent those extra days walking through Paris alone, trying to clear my head. I visited Notre Dame and sat in a cafe drinking coffee that tasted like burnt dreams. I walked along the Seine and watched artists paint versions of the city that looked more romantic than real. I tried to imagine what my grandmother would want me to do. She'd been pragmatic and kind, a woman who believed in justice but also in grace. She'd left me the lake house because she'd known I loved it, but would she want me to wage war against my own parents to claim it? When I landed at O'Hare, Iris was waiting for me at arrivals. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug without asking questions. We drove back to my apartment in silence, and when we got there, she made tea while I unpacked. Finally, sitting at my kitchen counter with mugs of chamomile, I told her everything. The birthday dinner. The Paris emergency. Vanessa's confession. The forged will. The lake house that was supposed to be mine. Iris listened without interrupting, her expression cycling through shock and anger and something that looked like vindication. I knew they were awful, she said when I finished. But this is next level. This is criminal. I know. So what are you going to do? I stared into my tea. I don't know yet. Part of me wants to fight. Wants to take them to court and expose everything and get back what's mine. But another part of me just wants to walk away. To let them keep their stolen house and their fake perfect life. To build something new that has nothing to do with them. Iris set down her mug and looked at me seriously. Nat, I love you, and I'll support whatever you decide. But can I say something? I nodded. You've spent your entire life walking away. Walking away from confrontation. Walking away from demanding what you deserve. Walking away from being seen. And every time you walk away, they win. They get to keep their version of the story. They get to keep erasing you. Her words hit me harder than I expected. You think I should fight? I think you should stop letting them decide who gets to matter. Whether that means fighting for the house or not, I don't know. But you need to stop disappearing just to make them comfortable. I sat with that, feeling something shift in my chest. You're right, I said finally. I've been making myself small my whole life. Trying not to be too much, too needy, too present. And it never worked. They still decided I was the problem. So maybe it's time to stop trying to be what they want and start fighting for what I deserve. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at my ceiling, thinking about Vanessa's apartment across town. About the safety deposit box key hidden in a jewelry box shaped like a book. About the documents that could prove my parents had committed fraud. About the choice I had to make. At 2 a.m, I got up and got dressed. I drove through empty Chicago streets to Vanessa's high-rise in Streeterville. I used the spare key she'd given me years ago, when we were still close, when she still trusted me with pieces of her life. The key still worked. Her apartment was dark and empty, sterile in that way of spaces that are decorated more for show than comfort. Everything matched. Everything coordinated. Nothing personal except for a few carefully curated photos on the mantel. I went to her bedroom and opened the top drawer of her dresser. The jewelry box was exactly where she said it would be, leather-bound and made to look like a vintage book. I opened it and found the small brass key nestled among her earrings and bracelets. I held it in my palm for a moment, feeling the weight of what it represented. Then I left. The next morning, I went to Vanessa's bank. I showed my ID and the key and signed into the private viewing room where safety deposit boxes could be accessed. The clerk brought me box 347 and left me alone. I lifted the lid. Inside was a manila folder, thick with papers. I pulled it out with shaking hands and opened it on the table in front of me. The first document was my grandmother's will. I recognized her signature at the bottom, elegant and slightly shaky, dated 2 months before she died. I read through it carefully, my legal training from college helping me parse the formal language. It was clear and unambiguous. The lake house property at 2847 Lakeshore Drive, Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, including all structures, furnishings, and watercraft, hereby bequeathed to my granddaughter Natalie Catherine Wagner. The next document was a letter from my grandmother's original attorney, confirming the will had been filed and notarized. Then came the correspondence between my father and Dr. Brennan. Email after email discussing how to handle the problem of my grandmother's will. My father's words were clinical and cold. We need to revise this before it becomes public. Natalie cannot have the property. It would be irresponsible to give her that kind of asset given her instability. I felt my jaw clench. Instability. They'd created a narrative about me being unstable to justify stealing my inheritance. There were more documents. A receipt from something called Heritage Document Services for signature verification and replication. A copy of the forged will, side by side with the real one. They were nearly identical except for the crucial difference. In the forged version, the lake house went to my parents, with a note claiming my grandmother had changed her mind due to concerns about my ability to maintain the property. It was sophisticated and convincing. If I hadn't seen the real will first, I might have believed it. At the bottom of the folder was something else. A medical report. I pulled it out, confused, and started reading. It was dated 7 years ago, from a psychiatric facility in Wisconsin. The patient name was mine. Natalie Catherine Wagner. The diagnosis listed severe depression, anxiety disorder, and substance abuse. The report recommended ongoing treatment and questioned the patient's ability to make sound financial decisions. I felt my blood run cold. I had never been to a psychiatric facility. I had never been diagnosed with any of these conditions. This report was completely fabricated. I sat back, my mind racing. They hadn't just forged a will. They'd created an entire false medical history to support their case that I was too unstable to inherit property. If this had ever gone to court, they would have used this report to prove my grandmother was right to change her will. That I was incompetent. That I needed to be protected from myself. It was comprehensive and brutal and so calculating that I felt sick. I carefully photographed every document with my phone. Then I put everything back in the folder and returned it to the safety deposit box. I walked out of that bank and sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. Then I called Dr. Lucas Brennan's office. His secretary answered on the second ring, professional and efficient. "I'd like to schedule a consultation regarding an estate matter," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Of course," she replied. "May I have your name?" "Natalie Wagner." There was a pause. A brief hesitation. Then she said, "Dr. Brennan has an opening tomorrow at 3. Would that work for you?" "Perfect," I said. "I'll be there." When I hung up, I smiled. Not a happy smile. A smile that meant I'd made a decision. I wasn't walking away. I was walking straight into the fire. And I was bringing proof. That evening, I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but someone Iris had recommended months ago when I'd mentioned family troubles in passing. Her name was Patricia Okonkwo, and she specialized in estate litigation and fraud cases. Her office was in the Loop, and she agreed to see me the next morning before my meeting with Dr. Brennan. I spent the rest of the night organizing my evidence, creating a timeline, writing down everything Vanessa had told me in the hospital. I barely slept, my mind too wired with purpose and anger and something that felt dangerously close to hope. Patricia Okonkwo was everything I needed her to be. Sharp, direct, and utterly unimpressed by family drama. She listened to my story without interruption, reviewed the photos of the documents on my phone, and then leaned back in her chair with her fingers steepled. "This is fraud," she said simply. "Document forgery, identity theft, and creation of false medical records. Criminal fraud, not just civil. Your parents could face serious legal consequences if you pursue this." I met her gaze. "Good." She smiled slightly. "All right then. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to that meeting with Dr. Brennan today. You're going to record the entire conversation on your phone. Illinois is a one-party consent state, so that's legal. You're going to ask him about your grandmother's estate. You're going to see if he admits to anything or tries to cover for your parents. Do not tell him you have the original documents yet. Just gather information. What if he realizes what I'm doing? Then we move to Plan B and file a lawsuit immediately. But my guess is he'll underestimate you. Men like him usually do." She pulled out a business card and slid it across her desk. "After your meeting, call me. We'll decide next steps. And Natalie." She waited until I looked at her. "You're doing the right thing. Not just for yourself but for every person who gets erased by their family and told it's their own fault." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and left her office with that business card burning a hole in my pocket. Dr. Brennan's office was in a glass tower overlooking the Chicago River. The lobby was all marble and modern art, the kind of space designed to intimidate. I gave my name to the receptionist, who offered me coffee I didn't drink. At 3 exactly, Dr. Brennan's secretary, the woman I'd spoken to on the phone, emerged to escort me back. Dr. Brennan was waiting in a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows and leather furniture that looked like it cost more than my car. He stood when I entered, extending his hand. "Miss Wagner," he said warmly. "Thank you for coming in. Please, have a seat." He was in his late 50s, silver-haired and confident, wearing a suit that had been tailored to fit him perfectly. He had the kind of face that people instinctively trusted, open and friendly with laugh lines around his eyes. I shook his hand and sat in the chair across from his desk, setting my phone on the armrest with the voice recorder already running. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice," I said. "Of course," he replied, settling into his own chair. "Your parents are valued clients. I understand you have some questions about your grandmother's estate." "I do. I've been reviewing my records and I noticed some discrepancies. I was hoping you could help clarify a few things." His expression remained pleasant, but I caught something flicker in his eyes. Concern, maybe. Or calculation. "I'd be happy to help however I can. What specifically are you concerned about?" I kept my voice casual, almost apologetic. "Well, I remember my grandmother talking about her property in Lake Geneva. She always said she wanted me to have it someday. But when she passed, my parents ended up with the house. I'm just trying to understand how that happened." Dr. Brennan nodded sympathetically. "I understand how that might be confusing. Estate matters can be complicated, especially when there are changes made near the end of someone's life." "Changes?" He leaned forward slightly. "Yes. Your grandmother did initially express interest in leaving the lake house to you. But in her final months, she had some concerns about whether you were in a position to take on that responsibility. She revised her wishes to ensure the property went to someone who could properly maintain it." I felt my pulse quicken but kept my face neutral. "What kind of concerns?" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "This is sensitive, Miss Wagner, but your grandmother was worried about your stability. She'd heard from your parents that you were struggling with some personal issues. Health issues. She wanted to make sure the property was in capable hands." "I see. And these concerns, were they documented somewhere?" "Of course. We have medical reports and correspondence that supported her decision to revise the will." "Medical reports about me?" He nodded. "Yes. Your parents provided documentation of treatment you'd received. Your grandmother felt it was in everyone's best interest to make the change." I sat back, letting a long pause stretch between us. "Dr. Brennan," I said finally, "I've never received psychiatric treatment. I've never been diagnosed with the conditions described in whatever reports my parents gave you. Those documents are fabricated." His face went carefully blank. "I'm sorry, Miss Wagner, but I'm not sure what you're suggesting." "I'm suggesting that someone created false medical records to justify changing my grandmother's will. And I'm wondering if you were involved in that process." The warmth drained from his expression. "Miss Wagner, I think you should be very careful about the accusations you're making. Everything I did regarding your grandmother's estate was legal and proper. Your parents provided documentation and I processed the will according to their wishes and what appeared to be your grandmother's final intentions. But you never verified those intentions directly with my grandmother, did you? She was quite ill at the end. It would have been inappropriate to burden her." "How convenient." He stood abruptly. "I think this meeting is over. If you have concerns about the estate, you're welcome to petition the court, but I assure you everything was handled by the book." I stood as well, picking up my phone deliberately. "Thank you for your time, Dr. Brennan. This has been very illuminating." As I walked to the door, he called after me. "Miss Wagner. Your parents were trying to protect you. Sometimes families make difficult decisions out of love." I turned back to look at him. "I don't think you know the first thing about love, Dr. Brennan. But I appreciate you confirming that you processed a will based on documents you never verified. My attorney will be very interested in that detail." I left his office and didn't stop walking until I was outside on the street, my heart hammering. I pulled out my phone and called Patricia Okonkwo. "I have the recording," I said when she answered. He admitted everything. There was satisfaction in her voice. "Good. Come to my office first thing tomorrow morning. We're filing a petition to set aside the probate and investigate fraud." "And Natalie?" I smiled grimly. "Yes. Welcome to the fight." The lawsuit was filed on a Thursday morning in early October. Patricia had worked through the night finalizing the petition, and I'd sat in her conference room until 3 in the morning reviewing every detail. The document was 47 pages long and outlined everything with clinical precision. Fraudulent alteration of estate documents. Creation of false medical records. Conspiracy to deprive rightful heir of inheritance. Breach of fiduciary duty. Each charge was supported by evidence, cross-referenced, footnoted. Patricia had built a case that was airtight and devastating. When we submitted it to the Cook County Circuit Court, the clerk's eyes widened as she read the first page. "This is going to make waves," she said quietly, and Patricia just smiled. "That's the idea." By noon, the court had scheduled a preliminary hearing for 3 weeks out. By 2 in the afternoon, my parents had been served with the complaint. By 4, my phone started ringing. I let every call go to voicemail. My mother first, her voice tight with fury. "Natalie, what do you think you're doing? Call me immediately." Then my father, attempting calm, but I could hear the panic underneath. "We need to talk about this misunderstanding before it goes any further. You're making a terrible mistake." Vanessa called too, but her message was different. "Nat, I just heard. Mom called me screaming. I told her I gave you the documents. I told her I'm testifying on your side. She said I'm dead to her now too. I guess we're both ghosts. Call me when you can." I didn't call anyone back. Instead, I sat in my apartment as the October light faded, watching the city lights flicker on across the skyline, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt solid. Present. Real. For the first time since that birthday dinner, I wasn't disappearing. I was taking up space and demanding to be seen. The next few weeks were strange and surreal. I went to work every day, sat in meetings about zoning variances and green space allocation, presented plans for the Pilsen housing project. On the surface, everything looked normal. But underneath, I was gathering evidence and building strategy and preparing for war. Patricia had hired a private investigator named Marcus Chen who specialized in document fraud. He was quiet and methodical, the kind of person who noticed everything and forgot nothing. He started by tracking down my grandmother's original attorney, a man named Howard Breslin who'd retired to Florida. Howard was in his 70s now, living in a condo near Tampa, and when Marcus reached him by phone, he was shocked to hear what had happened. "I never authorized any changes to Catherine Wagner's will," Howard told Marcus, his voice crackling over the recorded line. "She was very clear about her intentions. The lake house went to Natalie, no question. When I retired, I transferred all my active files to my associate, but Catherine's estate had already been finalized. Or so I thought." The next day, Howard sent a notarized affidavit confirming the original will's authenticity and stating he'd never witnessed any revision. Patricia added it to our evidence file, which was growing thicker by the day. Marcus also tracked down the document forger. Heritage Document Services turned out to be a small operation run by a man named Terry Voss who specialized in what he called historical recreation. Basically, he helped people create replica documents for estate planning purposes, insurance claims, or what he vaguely termed personal reasons. When Marcus showed up at his office in a strip mall in Naperville, Terry initially refused to talk. Then Marcus mentioned the words criminal conspiracy and potential jail time, and Terry became significantly more cooperative. He provided receipts showing my father had paid him $8,000 to create a replica of my grandmother's signature that would match her handwriting from the original will. He also provided emails where my father had explicitly stated the signature needed to be perfect because it was going to be used in legal documents. "Did he tell you what those legal documents were for?" Patricia asked when Marcus presented the evidence. Terry nodded miserably. "He said it was to update his mother's will. Said she'd changed her mind about some property but was too sick to sign the papers herself. He told me it was all legal, that his attorney had approved it. I felt sorry for him honestly. I thought I was helping a son honor his dying mother's wishes." Patricia's expression was grim. "And instead you helped him commit fraud." Terry looked like he might be sick. "I know that now. I've already contacted my own attorney. I'll testify to whatever you need." I'll provide everything I have. I don't want any part of this. With Terry's testimony secured, Patricia turned her attention to the fabricated medical records. This was trickier because the psychiatric report looked so official. It had a facility name, Lakeview Mental Health Center in Wisconsin, and was signed by a Dr. Raymond Mitchell. Marcus started by calling the facility. The receptionist who answered was confused. "We don't have a Dr. Raymond Mitchell on staff," she said. "We never have." And when Marcus asked for records from 7 years ago for a patient named Natalie Wagner, the system showed nothing. No admission. No treatment. No file. The report was completely invented. But someone had gone to significant effort to make it look real. The letterhead was accurate. The facility logo was correct. The language was clinical and professional. Marcus dug deeper and discovered that the report had been created using a template purchased from a website that sold customizable medical document templates. These templates were meant for educational purposes or film production, but they could easily be misused. The metadata on the PDF version of my fake medical report showed it had been created on my father's home computer, using software he'd purchased specifically for this purpose. When Patricia saw that evidence, she actually laughed. "Your father documented his own crime," she said. "He kept the receipts for the software, the template purchase, everything. It's like he wanted to get caught." "Maybe part of him did," I said quietly. "Maybe somewhere under all that calculation and control, there's a part of him that knows this is wrong." Patricia gave me a look that was almost pitying. "Natalie, people who know they're doing something wrong don't go to this much effort to cover it up. Your father isn't conflicted. He's just sloppy." As the preliminary hearing date approached, my parents made their first attempt at contact that didn't involve angry voicemails. A letter arrived at my apartment, delivered by courier. It was from my mother, handwritten on her expensive stationery with the embossed Scottsdale address. The letter was a masterpiece of manipulation disguised as maternal concern. "Dearest Natalie," it began. "I cannot express how deeply you've hurt us with these false accusations. Your father and I have always tried to do what's best for you, even when you made it so difficult. We never wanted things to come to this. We love you, despite everything. Despite your struggles and your anger and your inability to understand that sometimes parents have to make hard choices to protect their children. The lake house was never meant for you. You know as well as we do that you weren't capable of managing it. Grandma Catherine knew it too, which is why she changed her mind. The fact that you're now claiming fraud shows exactly why we were right to be concerned about your stability. Please, stop this lawsuit. Withdraw these terrible accusations. Come home to us. We can work this out as a family. Let's not air our private matters in public. Think of Vanessa. Think of how this is affecting her health and her career. Think of the family name. Don't you care about any of that? With love always, Mother." I read the letter 3 times, feeling my anger build with each pass. Then I showed it to Patricia. She read it once and immediately filed it as evidence. "This is witness intimidation," she said. "Attempting to pressure you into dropping the suit by using guilt and family obligation. And look at this language. Despite your struggles. Your inability to understand. Not capable of managing. She's building a narrative that you're incompetent, which supports the fake medical records. She's literally creating evidence for their defense in a letter meant to sound loving." I stared at the letter on Patricia's desk. Is there anything they won't weaponize? Apparently not. But the good news is, they're panicking. People who are confident in their position don't write letters like this. They're scared, and scared people make mistakes. The preliminary hearing arrived on a gray morning that threatened rain. I dressed carefully in a charcoal suit and low heels, pulling my hair back in a simple bun. I wanted to look professional and composed, like someone who absolutely could manage a lake house or any other property. Patricia met me outside the courthouse, her arms full of folders and her expression focused. Vanessa was already inside, sitting on a bench in the hallway. She looked thin and tired, dark circles under her eyes. When she saw me, she stood. "Hey, she said softly. Hey. How are you feeling? Terrified. But ready. She nodded. Me too. Mom called me 17 times yesterday. I blocked her number. Dad sent his lawyer to my apartment trying to convince me not to testify. I told him to leave or I'd call the police. I'm really doing this, Nat. I'm really standing with you. I squeezed her hand briefly. Thank you. She blinked back tears. I should have done it years ago. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and formal but not grand. My parents were already seated at the defense table with Dr. Brennan and their attorney, a sharp-looking woman named Caroline Reeves who had a reputation for being ruthless in estate litigation. My mother was wearing cream, perfectly pressed, her posture rigid. My father sat beside her, his face set in hard lines. Neither of them looked at me when I entered. Judge Howard Marks presided, a black man in his 60s with kind eyes and a reputation for having no patience for nonsense. He called the hearing to order and asked Patricia to present our petition. She stood and laid out our case with devastating clarity. The original will. The forged revision. The false medical records. The document forger's testimony. The metadata showing the reports were created on my father's computer. The emails between my father and Dr. Brennan discussing how to handle the problem of my grandmother's wishes. She presented each piece of evidence methodically, building a wall of proof that was impossible to ignore. When she finished, Caroline Reeves stood to respond. Your Honor, she began, this is a case of a troubled young woman lashing out at her family. Miss Wagner has a history of instability, as documented in the medical records on file. Her grandmother made a rational decision to protect her estate from someone who was not equipped to handle it. My clients acted in good faith, following the wishes of a dying woman. They are devastated that their daughter would make these accusations rather than accepting that her grandmother had valid concerns. Patricia stood immediately. Your Honor, the medical records Miss Reeves refers to are fabricated. We have proof they were created on Mr. Wagner's personal computer using purchase templates. We have testimony from the alleged treatment facility that no such patient record exists. We have digital forensics showing the creation date and author of these documents. This isn't a troubled daughter. This is a systematic fraud. Judge Marks looked at Caroline Reeves. Do you have any evidence that these medical records are authentic? Any testimony from the alleged treating physician? Any admission records from the facility? Caroline hesitated. We're working to secure that documentation, Your Honor. The judge's expression hardened. You're working to secure it. Or it doesn't exist. He looked at my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Wagner, these are serious allegations. If this court determines that you created false medical records and forged your mother's will, you could face criminal charges. Do you understand that? My father's attorney leaned in to whisper something, but the judge held up his hand. I asked your clients a direct question. My father finally spoke, his voice strained. Your Honor, we acted in what we believed were our mother's best interests and our daughter's best interests. We were trying to protect everyone. That's not an answer to my question, Mr. Wagner. Did you or did you not create false medical records? My father looked at my mother. My mother looked at her hands. The silence stretched for a long, painful moment. Then Judge Marks spoke. Based on the evidence presented, I'm ordering a full investigation into the probate of Catherine Wagner's estate. I'm freezing all assets related to the Lake Geneva property pending the outcome. And I'm referring this matter to the state's attorney for potential criminal prosecution. We'll reconvene in 60 days for a full evidentiary hearing. Until then, no one touches that lake house or any of its contents. Court dismissed. He banged his gavel and the room erupted. My mother stood abruptly, turning to look at me for the first time. Her face was pale with fury. You've destroyed this family, she hissed. I hope you're happy. I met her gaze steadily. You destroyed it years ago. I'm just making sure everyone knows. My father grabbed my mother's arm and pulled her toward the exit. Dr. Brennan followed, not meeting anyone's eyes. Their attorney gathered her files with sharp, angry movements. Vanessa came to stand beside me, and together we watched them leave. Patricia was grinning. "That went even better than I expected," she said. "Freezing the assets means they can't sell or mortgage the property. And the criminal referral means this isn't just a civil matter anymore. They're in real trouble." I should have felt victorious. Instead, I just felt exhausted. "Is it always going to be this hard?" I asked. Patricia's expression softened. "Only until you win. Then it gets easier." We left the courthouse and stood on the steps in the gray morning light. Vanessa hugged me suddenly, fiercely. "Thank you for letting me help fix this," she whispered. "I know it doesn't make up for anything, but thank you." I hugged her back, feeling the complicated tangle of anger and love and grief that came with having a sister who'd hurt me and was now trying to heal me. "We're not okay yet," I said quietly. "But maybe we're moving toward okay." The next 2 months were a blur of depositions and document reviews and strategy sessions. Marcus continued digging into my parents' finances and discovered they'd taken out a home equity line of credit against the lake house 6 months ago, using it to fund renovations to their Scottsdale house. They'd borrowed $300,000 against property they didn't legally own. Patricia amended our complaint to include that information, and the judge was not pleased. My parents were ordered to cease all financial activity related to the lake house and to provide a full accounting of any money they'd spent from that credit line. Vanessa's deposition was scheduled for a Tuesday in early November. I wasn't allowed to be present, but Patricia called me afterward. "She was incredible," Patricia said. "Completely honest about everything. How your parents manipulated her. How they forced her to choose. How she found the documents in your father's safe and made copies because she knew something was wrong. Caroline Reeves tried to paint her as a traitor to her family, but Vanessa held firm. She said she was a traitor to you for too long and she wasn't going to do it anymore." I felt something crack in my chest. How did she seem? Tired. But strong. Stronger than she's probably been in years. My own deposition came a week later. I sat across a conference table from Caroline Reeves for 6 hours while she tried to trip me up, to make me seem unstable or vindictive or confused. She asked about every job I'd ever had, every relationship, every time I'd been sick or sad or angry. She tried to suggest I had memory problems or substance issues or a tendency toward paranoia. Patricia objected to most of it, but some questions I had to answer. And each time, I answered calmly and truthfully. "No, I've never been treated for mental illness. No, I've never had substance abuse problems. No, I'm not doing this because I hate my parents. I'm doing it because they committed fraud and I want what's rightfully mine." By the time we finished, Caroline looked frustrated and I felt wrung out but steady. Patricia walked me to my car. "You did great," she said. "You didn't let her rattle you." I leaned against my car, suddenly shaky with released tension. "When does this end? When do I get to stop fighting?" "Soon," Patricia said. "The evidentiary hearing is in 3 weeks. We present everything to the judge, he makes a ruling, and it's over. One way or another, you'll have your answer." "What if we lose?" She looked at me seriously. "We won't. They have no defense. They forged documents. They created false records. They stole from you. The evidence is overwhelming. But if by some miracle they convince the judge otherwise, we appeal. We keep fighting until you get justice." I nodded, trying to believe her. The weeks leading up to the hearing felt endless. Thanksgiving came and went, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty about not attending a family dinner. Iris hosted instead, inviting me and Vanessa and a handful of friends who'd become chosen family. We ate turkey and stuffing and pumpkin pie in her small apartment, and it was warm and loud and nothing like the silent, tense meals I'd grown up with. Vanessa caught my eye across the table at one point and smiled, a real smile, and I smiled back. Maybe this was what family was supposed to feel like. People who chose you and kept choosing you. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I got up at 2 in the morning and drove out to Lake Geneva. It took 90 minutes, and by the time I arrived, the sky was just starting to lighten. I parked on the road outside my grandmother's house, the house that was supposed to be mine. I couldn't go inside, the property was still frozen, but I could look at it. The white clapboard siding. The dark green shutters. The wraparound porch with the swing where my grandmother and I used to sit. The dock stretching out into the still water. Everything looked the same and completely different. I sat there as the sun rose, painting the lake in shades of pink and gold. I thought about all the summers I'd spent here. Learning to swim. Reading books in the hammock. Helping my grandmother weed her garden. She'd been the one person in my family who made me feel like I mattered. Who listened when I talked. Who remembered the small things I loved. And she'd tried to give me this place, this piece of her, and my parents had stolen it. Not just the house but the gesture. The love. The intention behind it. They'd taken all of it and told themselves they were doing the right thing. I stayed until the sun was fully up and the cold started seeping through my jacket. Then I drove back to Chicago, feeling calm in a way I hadn't expected. Whatever happened in that courtroom today, I'd done everything I could. I'd stood up. I'd fought back. I'd refused to disappear. And that mattered, regardless of the outcome. The evidentiary hearing began at 9 in the morning. The courtroom was more crowded this time, reporters in the back rows because the case had attracted media attention. Heiress sues parents over stolen inheritance. Family feud over Lake Geneva estate. The headlines made it sound dramatic and scandalous, which I supposed it was. Judge Marks called the hearing to order and Patricia began presenting our case. She called Howard Breslin first, my grandmother's original attorney, who testified via video link from Florida. He confirmed the original will's authenticity and stated unequivocally that my grandmother had never expressed any intention to change it. He was sharp and credible, and Caroline Reeves couldn't shake his testimony. Next came Terry Voss, the document forger. He was nervous and apologetic, but his testimony was damning. He explained exactly how he'd created the forged signature, showed the receipts and emails from my father, and admitted he'd known it was ethically questionable but had convinced himself it was legal. Then Marcus testified about the metadata on the fake medical records, demonstrating with forensic precision that they'd been created on my father's computer. He showed the purchase templates, the creation timestamps, the digital fingerprints that proved beyond doubt that these documents were fabricated. Caroline tried to suggest the computer could have been hacked or the files corrupted, but Marcus calmly explained why that was technologically implausible. The evidence was solid. Finally, Patricia called Vanessa. My sister walked to the witness stand looking small but determined. She was sworn in and Patricia began asking questions. Vanessa answered each one honestly, her voice getting stronger as she went. She described finding the documents in my father's safe. Making copies because she knew something was wrong. Being forced to choose between her family and her conscience. Watching me get erased year after year. When Patricia asked her why she was testifying now, Vanessa looked directly at me. Because I watched my sister walk out of that birthday dinner with her head high even though our parents had just destroyed her in public. And I realized she'd been doing that her whole life. Walking away with dignity while they diminished her. And I was tired of being part of that. I was tired of choosing wrong. So I chose her. I chose the truth. There wasn't a sound in that courtroom. Caroline Reeves stood for cross-examination and tried to suggest Vanessa was lying to get back at our parents for some perceived slight. Vanessa just shook her head. I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing it because it's right. Because Natalie deserves what Grandma wanted her to have. And because I want to be able to look at myself in the mirror again. When Vanessa stepped down, Patricia rested our case. Caroline Reeves called my father to testify. He took the stand looking diminished, older than I remembered. She asked him to explain his actions, to provide context for the documents. My father cleared his throat and began talking about how worried he and my mother had been about me. How I'd always been difficult, sensitive, unable to handle responsibility. How they'd felt it was their duty to protect my grandmother's legacy from my inevitable mismanagement. He never quite admitted to forging anything, but he also never denied it. He just talked in circles about intentions and family obligations and doing what he thought was best. Patricia's cross-examination was surgical. She walked him through every piece of evidence. The forger's testimony. The metadata. The emails. The fake medical records. With each question, my father became more defensive, more evasive. Finally, Patricia asked the question that mattered. "Mr. Wagner, did you forge your mother's signature on a revised will?" My father looked at his lawyer. He looked at my mother in the gallery. He looked at the judge. Then he said, very quietly, "I did what I had to do to protect my family." Patricia smiled. "Thank you, Mr. Wagner." No further questions. Judge Marks called a short recess and then returned with his ruling. He didn't waste time. "I've reviewed all the evidence presented," he began. "I've heard testimony from multiple witnesses. And the conclusion is inescapable. Mr. and Mrs. Wagner engaged in a deliberate, calculated fraud to deprive their daughter of her rightful inheritance. They forged documents. They created false medical records. They conspired with their attorney to circumvent their mother's clearly stated wishes. This is not a case of misunderstanding or family disagreement. This is criminal fraud." He looked at my parents. "I am setting aside the fraudulent will and reinstating Catherine Wagner's original will as the valid governing document. The Lake Geneva property and all assets associated with it are hereby transferred to Natalie Wagner, effective immediately. Additionally, Mr. and Mrs. Wagner will be responsible for all legal fees associated with this case, as well as restitution for any funds spent against the property's equity line." My mother made a sound like a wounded animal. My father sat motionless. Judge Marks continued. "I am also referring this matter to the state's attorney with a strong recommendation for prosecution. What you did was not just unethical. It was illegal. And there must be consequences. Court is adjourned." The gavel came down and suddenly it was over. Patricia grabbed my arm, grinning. "We won. You won." Vanessa was crying in the gallery. Iris was there too, having taken the morning off work, and she was cheering quietly. I stood there feeling strangely empty, like I'd been holding my breath for so long I'd forgotten how to exhale properly. I'd won. The house was mine. Justice had been served. So why did I feel so hollow? Because winning didn't fix the years of erasure. It didn't give me back the birthdays and holidays and family moments I'd been excluded from. It didn't make my parents love me the way I'd always hoped they would. It just proved I'd been right. And sometimes being right is the loneliest feeling in the world. I drove out to the lake house 3 days after the ruling. Patricia had given me the keys that morning, freshly cut from the locks my parents had changed years ago without my knowledge or permission. The keys were cold in my palm as I sat in my car outside the property, staring at the house that was now legally mine. Mine. The word felt foreign, like trying on clothes that didn't quite fit even though the size was right. I'd fought for this. Bled for it. Spent months gathering evidence and sitting through depositions and watching my family implode in a courtroom. And now it was done. The house was mine. So why couldn't I make myself get out of the car? Finally, after sitting there for 20 minutes, I opened the door and walked up the path to the porch. The wooden steps creaked the same way they always had. The porch swing swayed slightly in the December wind. I put the key in the lock and turned it. The door opened with a familiar groan. Inside, the house smelled like my parents'. My mother's perfume lingered in the air. My father's cigars, the expensive kind he only smoked when he thought he'd earned them. I stood in the entryway and felt like an intruder in a space that should have felt like coming home. The furniture was different from how I remembered it. My grandmother had favored comfortable, worn pieces with history and character. Floral couches and mismatched chairs and shelves stuffed with books and seashells and framed photos. My parents had replaced it all with modern minimalism. Sleek leather sofas in neutral tones. Glass coffee tables. Abstract art on walls that used to hold my grandmother's watercolor landscapes. They'd erased her the same way they'd erased me, stripping away anything soft or sentimental and replacing it with something cold and impressive. I walked through each room slowly, cataloging the changes. The kitchen had been renovated with marble countertops and professional-grade appliances. The bedrooms had been repainted in shades of gray and beige. The porch had new furniture, expensive teak that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread rather than a lake house where people actually lived. Only one room remained untouched. My grandmother's study, a small space off the main hallway that she'd used for correspondence and reading. The door was closed, and when I opened it, I found everything exactly as she'd left it. Her desk with the brass lamp. Her bookshelf filled with novels and poetry and gardening guides. Her reading chair by the window with the embroidered cushion she'd made herself. I sank into that chair, and for the first time since the ruling, I cried. Not angry tears or frustrated tears, but the deep, exhausted kind that comes from carrying something heavy for too long and finally being able to set it down. I cried for my grandmother who'd tried to give me something precious and had it stolen. I cried for the family I'd wanted and would never have. I cried for the girl who'd spent her whole life trying to earn love that was never going to come. And I cried because I'd won, but winning felt more like losing everything that mattered. My phone rang. It was Vanessa. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Hey," I said, my voice rough. "Hey. Are you at the house?" "Yeah. How is it?" I looked around the study, the only room that still held traces of the grandmother we'd both loved. "It's different. They changed everything." I figured. She paused. "Nat, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What are you going to do with it?" I hadn't let myself think about that yet. The practical question of what comes next when you've spent so much energy on the fight that you haven't planned for victory. "I don't know," I admitted. "Keep it maybe. Or sell it. I haven't decided." "Do you want company?" "I could drive up. Be there in 2 hours." I surprised myself by saying yes. 2 hours later, Vanessa's car pulled into the driveway. She got out slowly, looking at the house like it might bite her. When she came inside, she stopped in the entryway the same way I had. "Wow," she said quietly. "They really did a number on this place." We walked through together, and with each room, Vanessa's expression grew sadder. "I helped them pick out the furniture," she confessed when we stood in the living room. "I thought we were just updating things. Making them more modern. I didn't realize they were trying to erase her. Erase everything that made this place feel like home." We ended up in the kitchen, making tea from supplies my parents had left behind. Earl Grey in expensive tins. Vanessa poured hot water over the bags, and we sat at the island in silence for a while. Finally, she spoke. "I got a call from Mom yesterday." I didn't answer, but she left a voicemail. She said I'm dead to her. That she has no daughters anymore. That we've both betrayed everything the family stands for. I wrapped my hands around my mug. "How do you feel about that?" Vanessa was quiet for a long time. "Relieved," she said finally. "Is that awful? To feel relieved that your mother has disowned you?" "I don't think so. I think it means you're finally free." She nodded slowly. "I've been seeing a therapist. Started right after the hearing. She's helping me understand how messed up everything was. How they manipulated both of us, just in different ways. You they excluded. Me they controlled. Both of us ended up trapped." I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw how thin she'd gotten, how tired she seemed. "Are you okay, Van?" "Honestly." She met my eyes. "Not yet. But I think I might be someday. Especially now that I'm not carrying their secrets anymore." We spent the rest of that afternoon going through the house together, deciding what to keep and what to change. The modern furniture would go, we agreed. We'd try to find pieces that felt more like our grandmother, or at least more like a place where people could be comfortable instead of impressed. The study would stay exactly as it was. That room was sacred. When the sun started setting, painting the lake in shades of orange and purple, we sat on the dock together like we used to as kids. "Remember when we used to jump off this dock?" Vanessa said. "And Grandma would time us to see who could hold their breath longer underwater. I remember you always won. You had fish lungs." She laughed, a real laugh, the kind I hadn't heard from her in years. "I used to cheat. I'd come up for air on the far side of the dock where she couldn't see and then swim back under." "You cheated? The whole time?" She shrugged, grinning. "I was competitive. I still am. But at least now I'm trying to compete at things that actually matter. Like being a decent human being." "That's a low bar, Van." "Yeah, well, I spent a lot of years not clearing it. I'm starting from the ground up." We sat there until the cold drove us inside. Vanessa headed back to Chicago, promising to come up again next weekend to help with the furniture situation. I stayed one more night, sleeping in my grandmother's study on an air mattress I'd brought from my apartment. I wanted to be in the one room that still felt like her. In the morning, I walked down to the lake and stood at the water's edge. The surface was still and gray, reflecting the winter sky. I thought about my grandmother and how she used to say that water remembers everything. Every stone thrown, every swimmer who passed through, every secret whispered at its edge. "The lake remembers," she'd say. "Even when we forget, the water holds it all." I drove back to Chicago feeling less hollow than before. The house was mine, but it didn't have to stay a monument to my parents' theft and my grandmother's absence. It could become something new. Something that honored her memory without being frozen in the past. I just had to figure out what that looked like. Work became a welcome distraction. The Pilsen housing project was moving into final approvals and I threw myself into the details. Site plans and building codes and community feedback sessions. Iris noticed I was working longer hours, staying later at the office. "You okay?" she asked one evening when everyone else had gone home. "I'm processing." She rolled her chair over to my desk. "That's code for not okay." I smiled despite myself. I won the case. I got the house. I should be celebrating. But instead I just feel like I've lost something I can't get back. Iris was quiet for a moment. "You lost the family you wanted. Not the family you had, because that family was never real. But the one you hoped for. The one where your parents saw you and loved you and chose you. That family never existed, but you still have to grieve it." I felt my throat tighten. How do you move on from that? How do you stop wanting something that was never going to happen? You let yourself be sad about it. And then you build something better. You already started, Nat. You fought for what was yours. You stood up for yourself. You didn't disappear just because they wanted you to. That's not nothing. That's everything. Her words settled over me like a blanket. Maybe she was right. Maybe winning wasn't supposed to feel triumphant. Maybe it was supposed to feel like this. Like closing a door and turning toward a window. Like endings and beginnings tangled together in a way that made your chest ache and your shoulders feel lighter at the same time. The criminal charges against my parents moved forward slowly. The state's attorney assigned a prosecutor named James Whitmore who called me in for a meeting in early January. He was in his 40s, efficient and matter-of-fact, and he laid out the case bluntly. "Your parents are facing multiple felony counts. Document forgery, fraud, identity theft. If convicted, they're looking at significant prison time. My father's attorney is already trying to negotiate a plea deal." I sat in his office feeling numb. What kind of plea deal? Probation maybe. Restitution definitely. Your father would have to admit to the fraud publicly and potentially lose his law license since Dr. Brennan is likely to face disbarment. Your mother would face similar consequences. Do you want my opinion on whether they should accept a plea? I asked carefully. Whitmore shook his head. That's not my call and it shouldn't be yours either. This is a criminal matter now. The state is prosecuting them for breaking the law, not for hurting you, even though those things are connected. What I need from you is cooperation. Testimony if it goes to trial. Documentation of damages. Can you do that? I nodded. Yes. I can do that. Good. He closed the file on his desk. For what it's worth, Miss Wagner, I've been doing this job for 15 years and I've seen a lot of family disputes. What your parents did was particularly calculated and cruel. You showed a lot of courage in standing up to them. I left his office and walked through downtown Chicago in the January cold, my breath fogging in front of me. Courage. That's what people kept calling it. But it didn't feel brave. It felt necessary. Like breathing or eating or any other act of survival. What choice did I have? Let them steal from me and stay silent? Disappear the way they wanted me to? No. I'd spent 30 years doing that. The least I could do was spend a few months fighting back. My phone rang as I reached the train station. Unknown number. I hesitated but answered. Hello. Is this Natalie Wagner? Yes. Who's calling? My name is Ruth Caldwell. I'm a journalist with the Chicago Tribune. I'm working on a story about estate fraud and elder abuse, and your case came up in my research. I was hoping you might be willing to talk to me. I stopped walking, people flowing around me on the busy sidewalk. I don't think that's a good idea. I understand if you're not comfortable. But I want you to know this isn't about sensationalizing your family drama. I'm interested in the larger pattern. How many families use forged documents and false medical records to control inheritances? How the system fails to protect people like your grandmother and people like you. Your story could help change that. I thought about my grandmother's while gathering dust in my father's safe. About Terry Voss and his template documents. About how easy it had been for my parents to create an entire false narrative about my mental health. How many other people, I asked quietly, how many other cases have you found? Ruth's voice was grim. In Cook County alone? At least 40 in the past 5 years. And those are just the ones where someone fought back. Most people don't. Most people don't have the resources or the evidence or the support system to challenge their families in court. So the fraud goes unnoticed and unpunished. I'll talk to you. But I want final approval on anything you quote me saying. And I want you to focus on the systemic issues, not just my family circus. Deal. When can we meet? I gave her Iris's phone number and told her to coordinate a time through my friend. I wasn't ready to have journalists with my direct contact information. When I got home that night, there was a package waiting outside my apartment door. No return address, just my name written in handwriting I recognized instantly. My mother's. I carried it inside and stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a jewelry box. The kind my grandmother used to keep her good pieces in, walnut with brass hinges and a lock that didn't quite catch anymore. I opened it carefully. Inside were all of my grandmother's jewelry, the pieces my parents had kept when they sorted through her estate. Her wedding ring. Her pearl necklace. Her silver bracelet with the tiny charms. The emerald earrings she'd worn to every special occasion. At the bottom of the box was a note on my mother's stationery. These should have gone to you from the beginning. I'm sorry it took a lawsuit for me to remember that. No signature. No explanation beyond that one sentence. I held the pearl necklace up to the light, remembering how it had looked on my grandmother. She'd worn it to my 8th grade graduation, and I'd thought she looked like a queen. She'd let me try it on afterward, the pearls cool against my skin, and she'd said someday these will be yours. When you're old enough to understand what they mean. I didn't know then that she'd meant more than just the jewelry. She'd meant the weight of things that mattered. The responsibility of holding on to what's valuable. The choice to pass love forward instead of hoarding it. I called Vanessa. Mom sent me Grandma's jewelry. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. She sent me something too. A letter. apologizing for forcing me to choose, saying she understood why I testified against them. It was weird, Nat. Not warm exactly, but not cruel either. Just sad. Do you think they're trying to make amends? I turned the jewelry box in my hands. I think they're trying to ease their guilt. That's different from making amends. Making amends would mean acknowledging what they did and why it was wrong. This is just returning stolen property and hoping we'll call it even. Vanessa sighed. You're probably right. But still. It's something. Maybe. Or maybe it's just another manipulation. Another way to control the narrative. Look, we gave her the jewelry back, we tried to apologize, and she still won't forgive us. See how unreasonable she is. I could hear Vanessa moving around on her end of the line. God, I hate that you're probably right about that. I hate that I can't even trust a simple gesture anymore. That's what they do to you. They make you doubt everything, even the good things. We were quiet for a moment. Then Vanessa said, I'm going to keep the letter anyway. Not because I forgive them, but because I want to remember that they were capable of something other than pure manipulation. Even if it's just guilt dressed up as remorse. I kept the jewelry too. I put it in my own safe, a small fireproof box I kept in my closet. Not to wear, not yet anyway, but to have. To hold on to this piece of my grandmother that my parents hadn't managed to steal or erase. That felt like enough for now. The Tribune article came out in March. Ruth had done exactly what she promised, focusing on the systemic issues while using my case as the central narrative. How estate fraud targets vulnerable seniors and their heirs. The article was long and detailed and devastating. She'd interviewed other victims, other families torn apart by forged documents and manipulated wills. She'd talked to attorneys and judges and elder care advocates. And woven through it all was my story. The forged will. The fake medical records. The years of erasure. My parents were named but not villainized. Ruth presented the facts and let readers draw their own conclusions. The article went viral. I started getting emails and messages from people sharing their own stories of inheritance theft and family fraud. Some wanted advice. Some just wanted to be heard. I read every single one, even though it was emotionally exhausting, because I understood that need to tell someone who might actually believe you. Iris helped me organize the responses and we started compiling resources. Lists of attorneys who specialized in estate fraud. Information about how to obtain probate records. Guides for documenting elder abuse. It wasn't much, but it felt like turning my pain into something useful. In April, my parents accepted a plea deal. My father pled guilty to forgery and fraud. My mother pled guilty to conspiracy. They were each sentenced to 2 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and ordered to pay full restitution for the money they'd borrowed against the lake house plus all of my legal fees. Dr. Brennan lost his law license. My parents were also required to attend counseling and give a formal apology in court. I went to the sentencing hearing, sitting in the back row with Vanessa beside me. When the judge asked if my parents had anything to say, my father stood. Your Honor, he began, his voice smaller than I remembered. I want to apologize to my daughter Natalie for the harm I've caused. I convinced myself I was protecting her, but I was really protecting myself. My own ego. My own sense of control. I was wrong to forge my mother's will. I was wrong to create false documents. And I was most wrong to make my daughter feel like she didn't matter. I don't expect her to forgive me. I just want her to know that I understand what I did and I'm sorry. He sat down. My mother didn't stand. She just said quietly, I'm sorry too, and that was all. I didn't cry. I didn't feel relieved or vindicated or even particularly satisfied. I just felt tired. The judge accepted their plea and that was it. Court was adjourned. My parents left without looking at me. Vanessa squeezed my hand. How do you feel? She asked. Like it's finally over, I said. And like it'll never really be over. Both things at once. She nodded. Yeah. That sounds about right. We went to lunch after, just the two of us, at a small Italian place near the courthouse. We ordered pasta and wine and talked about everything except our parents. Vanessa told me about work, about a promotion she was up for. I told her about the housing project in Pilsen finally breaking ground. We laughed about a terrible movie we'd both watched. We made plans to go to the lake house together the following weekend. It wasn't perfect. We weren't magically healed or back to being the sisters we might have been if our parents hadn't spent years driving wedges between us. But we were trying. We were showing up. We were choosing each other in small, consistent ways. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. When I got home that evening, I found one more piece of mail waiting. A thick envelope with a return address in Lake Geneva. I opened it carefully and found a letter from the Lake Geneva Historical Society. Dear Miss Wagner, it began. We understand you recently inherited the property at 2847 Lakeshore Drive. We wanted to reach out because your grandmother Catherine was a longtime supporter of our organization and we have something we'd like to discuss with you. The letter went on to explain that my grandmother had been planning to donate part of her estate to the Historical Society to help preserve local landmarks and support educational programs. She discussed it with them in detail but had died before finalizing the paperwork. They wanted to know if I'd be interested in honoring her wishes. I read the letter 3 times, feeling something shift in my chest. This was what I'd been looking for. A way to make the lake house about more than just winning or losing. About more than my parents' fraud or my own vindication. A way to make it about my grandmother's legacy. About what she'd actually wanted, which was to give back to the community she loved. I called the Historical Society the next morning and set up a meeting. 2 weeks later, I sat in their small office surrounded by old photographs and maps of Lake Geneva, discussing possibilities. We could create a scholarship fund in my grandmother's name for local students studying environmental science or history. We could host community events at the lake house, opening it up a few times a year for historical tours or educational programs. We could partner with them on preservation efforts for other significant properties in the area. The director, a woman named Susan with gray hair and sharp eyes, listened to my ideas and then added her own. Your grandmother loved this town, she said. She wanted to make sure it stayed beautiful and accessible for everyone, not just wealthy summer people. If we do this right, we can honor that vision. I left that meeting feeling lighter than I had in months. This was it. This was how I moved forward. Not by holding onto the house like a trophy or selling it to the highest bidder, but by sharing it. By making it something that mattered beyond my family's dysfunction. I called Vanessa from the car. I think I figured out what to do with the lake house. She listened while I explained the plan, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Grandma would love that, she said finally. She really would. And Nat. I'm proud of you. For not letting what they did make you small or bitter. For finding a way to make something good come from all of this. I felt tears prick my eyes. Thanks, Van. That means more than you know. We're going to be okay, aren't we? Eventually. Yeah, I said. Eventually we are. That night, I went back through the box of my grandmother's jewelry. I pulled out the pearl necklace and tried it on, looking at myself in the mirror. The pearls were luminous against my skin, just like I remembered. I looked different wearing them. Not younger or older, just more present. More solid. Like I was finally taking up the space I'd always been entitled to. I thought about my grandmother's words. Someday these will be yours when you're old enough to understand what they mean. I understood now. They meant holding on to what matters. They meant choosing love over control. They meant remembering that the best inheritance isn't money or property but the courage to be exactly who you are, even when the people who should love you most would rather you disappear. I wore the necklace for the rest of the evening, even though I wasn't going anywhere special. Just around my apartment, making dinner and reading a book and living my quiet, ordinary life. The life my parents had tried so hard to erase. The life that was fully and finally mine. The first community event at the lake house happened on a Saturday in June. We opened the grounds to local families for a historical tour and picnic, with the Lake Geneva Historical Society providing information about the property's history and the area's ecology. I spent the morning setting up tables on the lawn and arranging chairs on the porch, my hands shaking slightly with nerves. What if nobody came? What if this whole idea was just me trying to make myself feel better about a house I didn't know what else to do with? But people did come. Families with children who ran down to the dock. Elderly couples who remembered my grandmother and shared stories about her kindness. College students interested in local history. A group of high school kids doing research for a summer project. By noon, the property was full of life in a way I'd never seen before. People laughing and learning and treating the space like it belonged to everyone, which I supposed it did now. Vanessa had driven up to help, and I found her talking to a young girl who was examining the flowers in my grandmother's restored garden. "You planted these?" the girl asked. "My grandmother did," Vanessa said. "A long time ago. But my sister brought them back." Susan from the Historical Society pulled me aside mid-afternoon. "This is wonderful, Natalie. Your grandmother would be so proud." I watched a father lift his daughter onto the dock, both of them peering into the water looking for fish. I hope so. I really hope so. As the sun started setting and people began packing up to leave, a woman approached me. She looked to be in her 60s, with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair. "You don't know me," she said, "but I knew your grandmother. We were in the same book club for 20 years. I wanted to tell you something she told me once about this house." I waited, curious. She said this house had seen a lot of joy and a lot of pain. That her own mother had struggled here, that there had been difficult times in her marriage, that not everything was as perfect as it looked from the outside. But she said the house taught her that places hold what we give them. If we fill them with love and openness, that's what they become. If we fill them with secrets and control, that becomes their nature too. She said she hoped whoever ended up with this place would choose love. The woman smiled at me. "I think you did. I think she'd be very happy with your choice." I thanked her, my throat tight with emotion. After everyone left, Vanessa and I sat on the dock watching the sun paint the water in shades of pink and gold. "Think we'll do this again?" she asked. "Definitely. Maybe make it a monthly thing in the summer. Open the house for tours, workshops, community gatherings. Make it a place that belongs to everyone." She bumped her shoulder against mine. "You know, when we were kids, I used to be so jealous that Grandma liked you better. But she didn't like me better. She just saw me more clearly." Vanessa shook her head. "No, she definitely liked you better. But I get it now. You were the one who actually paid attention. Who cared about the garden and the birds and the stories she told. I was too busy trying to be impressive. Trying to be what everyone else wanted. And now." Vanessa smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Now I'm trying to be someone I can actually live with. It's harder but better." We sat there until the mosquitoes drove us inside. That night, sleeping in the renovated guest room that now held comfortable furniture instead of museum pieces, I dreamed about my grandmother. She was sitting on the porch in her reading chair, and when she saw me, she smiled. "You did good, sweetheart," she said. "You made it yours, but you didn't hold it tight. That's the secret. Hold things gently and let them breathe." I woke up with tears on my face and the morning sun streaming through the windows. The lake house became my project over the following year. Not my only project, I still had my work in Chicago and the Pilsen housing development that was finally seeing families move into completed units. But the lake house was where I went to remember what mattered. We established the Natalie Wagner Scholarship Fund, giving annual awards to local students studying environmental science or history. We hosted monthly open houses in the summer and quarterly workshops in the off-season. The house was never empty anymore. It was always full of people learning and growing and connecting. Vanessa and I fell into a rhythm of visiting together twice a month. We'd drive up on Friday evenings after work, spend Saturday working on projects or hosting events, and drive back Sunday afternoon. Sometimes we talked about heavy things, our parents, and the lawsuit and the years we lost. More often we talked about everyday things, her latest work crisis or my frustration with city bureaucracy or the books we were reading. We were building something new, a relationship that wasn't based on our parents' manipulation or our childhood dynamics. Just two adults choosing to show up for each other. I saw my parents only once more. It was at a coffee shop in downtown Chicago, completely by accident. I was meeting Iris for lunch and they walked in as I was leaving. We all froze. My mother looked older, tired lines around her eyes I didn't remember. My father had gone completely gray. For a moment, nobody moved. Then my mother said quietly, "Natalie." I nodded. "Mom. Dad. How are you?" "We're managing," my father said. "We heard about what you're doing with the house. The community programs." "That's good." That's what she would have wanted. I didn't know what to say to that. Thank you didn't feel right. Neither did anything else. So I just said, "I hope you're both well," and walked past them into the bright afternoon. Iris was waiting outside. "You okay?" she asked, seeing my face. "Yeah," I said, surprised to find it was true. "I actually am." Because I realized standing there that I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need them to acknowledge what they'd done or apologize properly or suddenly become different people. I just needed to keep living my life in a way that made sense to me. That honored the people who actually loved me. That created spaces where other people could belong. The rest of it, their guilt or denial or whatever they were carrying, that was theirs to manage. I was done carrying it for them. That evening, I drove back out to the lake house alone. I sat on the dock as the sun set, my grandmother's pearl necklace around my neck, and I thought about everything that had brought me here. The birthday dinner where they tried to erase me. The Paris emergency that cracked everything open. The lawsuit and the evidence and the slow, painful process of fighting for what was mine. And finally, this. A house full of life and purpose. A sister who was learning to choose right. A future that was fully and completely my own. The water was still and dark, holding the reflection of the sky. My grandmother was right. Water remembers everything. Every pain, every joy, every person who passed through. But it also keeps moving, keeps flowing, keeps reflecting whatever new light touches its surface. I could be like that too. Holding the past without being trapped by it. Moving forward while honoring what came before. Creating something beautiful from something broken. I didn't need my family's table anymore. I'd built my own. And anyone who needed a place to belong was welcome at it. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.